Well, look, one of the solutions which is being put forward all over the place here in Britain is to have a second referendum. And this is what the oligarchy normally do. If they don't get the result they wanted, then they have a second referendum. And they keep going until they do. They did this in Ireland, they've done it elsewhere when it was the time for the EU constitution. Quite a lot of people across Europe actually voted against the EU constitution. So they just changed the name to the Lisbon Treaty, and they came back for more and more votes, put a lot more propaganda out, and then they got their way. But the second referendum here, I don't think people will stomach it. Of course, this means there has been 2 years of propaganda which has been mostly anti-Brexit, pro-oligarchy, pro-EU. Let's remember that the big media companies are mostly part of the corporate media, and they have their money in tax havens, and they are not interested in national governments. They would much rather be running the show, and many of their bankster friends are running the show, so they're not really interested in any kind of separation. They want to see Brussels. In fact, they're very close to Brussels. In BBC, for example, are partly funded by Brussels. So the voters also are dying. So that is something like 1.5 million voters who voted in the last referendum will now be dead. Now, this is our elders of our tribe, you know. The elders of society are dying. These are the people that can remember the days before the European Economic Community. We entered in 1973 under Edward Heath, who forced us in, and then we had a referendum back in 75, which was to remain. So those people who can remember the days before and have seen what the EU has done to Britain, that 1.5 million of those will be dead. And what they're doing is they're appealing to impressionable young people, hoping that lots and lots of young people will come along, buy the propaganda and vote Remain. But that's by no means guaranteed. Certainly, a second referendum would be a complete betrayal of the country and a betrayal of trust in politics, and may solve absolutely nothing.
Adam Gary, we spoke of opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn's red line, which is quite clear. His condition for talks is a pledge to block a no-deal Brexit. Can you elaborate on the issue for us and our viewers about the consequences of a no-deal Brexit and what happens in that case? For starters, we know that trade with the EU would default to basic WTO rules. How much pain are we looking at for the British economy?
Well, it depends on how the business community reacts. I mean, you frankly just answered your own question. What happens in a no-deal Brexit is that the existing single market and customs union that right now Britain is in will still exist, but Britain will cease to be a member, and the only agreements in place for trade between the European Union and UK will be those fundamental ones laid down in the WTO. But just as many nations in the WTO have trade agreements with each other over and beyond that which is in the WTO, there's always a possibility that Britain could negotiate for a trade deal over and above those basic rules with the EU, and hopefully they would do so with even more vigor in respect of China and in respect of ASEAN and in respect of other countries where economic growth and productivity is really something quite marvelous. The EU is largely a stagnant place, and with the exception of Germany, not a great deal of interesting economic activity is going on when one looks to the broader future as opposed to just the near term. And so if a WTO-style Brexit were to happen, of course, Britain, like every country, should try to trade as much as possible with every other country in the world. But I honestly think the priorities ought to be looking at where to take things with the great economic blocs and powers of Asia rather than the EU. Obviously, there's plenty of time for both. There's plenty of envoys to do both things, so long as they can find one who's sufficiently cranially active. But so long as those requirements are met, let the negotiations begin. The idea that after a hard Brexit, negotiations just stop and everything gets frozen, people are negotiating all the time. Unless you're the Pentagon, of course, everything in life is negotiable, as well it should be. The only people who set things in stone in the temporal world are those who try to play God, and that, of course, is blasphemy.
All right, Mr. Gosling, will a no-deal Brexit put the British economy down for the count?
Depends which economists you ask about this, but look, let's remember we're not in the Eurozone. We have our pound still, so we're insulated from that. The former Bank of England governor, Mervyn King, who I actually got a lot of respect for. He's somebody who worked his way up in the old-fashioned way. His father was a railway porter. He went to grammar school up in Worcester, and he's saying that it will be almost no economic effect at all from Brexit because of the fact that we will be, the demand will still be there from the UK, and so we will actually be increasing manufacturing here in Britain, so people will be able to get their products from Britain, and this will do a lot to help and maybe increase jobs here in the UK and start to, bring our own industrial policy back to Britain again, which we haven't had really since we joined the EEC. And this is what many people warned about in the early 70s, said, look, many of our policies are now going to be decided in Brussels. But look, let's not forget, you can ask the French. They've been having these gilets jaunes marches for the last couple of months now, or month and a bit, and they are for Frexit. They have also decided that the control from Brussels is not going to work for them, and they want to lead too. So it's actually only the British that have been given the chance to have this vote, and now there's lots of people who are on the gravy train. Many people who are expecting, who MPs, who they are just getting a job as an MP for a while and then they want to go into big business. They're much more loyal to big business than they are to their voters and to the people, their own constituents. And those lot will, I'm afraid, probably lose their jobs as a result of this. And they can see that lovely gravy train disappearing with Brexit. So it always depends who you ask. I actually think we will probably, though, be hit hard economically, because the oligarchy are very powerful. I've studied the Bilderberg conferences for many years, and if you look at the people there, they control most of the money in the Western world.
Sure.
They're completely anonymous. Nobody knows who these people are. They never come onto TV, but they hate this, and they will hit us hard as they can. They want to make sure that Britain is made an example of, so that other countries in the EU don't try and follow us.
So we're reaching the end of the show, and we've got time for one last question. Very briefly, if you may. Gentlemen, let's start with Mr. Gary. A no-deal Brexit or an exit with a deal? What's your prediction? One of these two, or is there another viable option in your opinion?
I'm too honest to make such a prediction because at the rate things are going, no one knows what they're doing. And in the words of Kenneth Clark, a man who I have some different views on, but I nevertheless respect, he said, don't listen to what anyone's saying. No one knows what is going on. So my only advice is for people to make sure that they have plenty of empty cans stacked up, because there's going to be a lot of hot air going around.
Okay, Mr. Gosling, your predictions.
Yeah, well, I think what we may well see is an extension of Article 50. So that just to kick the can down the road a while. But I think maybe even more likely than that is a last-minute deal, a Canada plus deal, so to make sure that the EU get their 39 billion, because they'll be in all sorts of trouble. The Eurozone is in trouble anyway. There's no growth hardly in the Eurozone now, and so they really need that 40 billion pounds, and I think they may sign some sort of compromise Canada plus deal right at the last minute.
That's all the time we have for tonight's show. Thanks to my guest political commentator Adam Gary joining us from the British capital London, and also thanks to investigative journalist Tony Gosling joining us from Bristol, and also special thanks to you, our viewers, for staying with us. Tune in same time, same place for another edition of The Debate. It's good night for now. Bye, everybody.